This is the AdNonTech podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranek. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Dr. Doug Reed, and I am located on Abagway, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
My name is Dr. Matthew Stranek, and I am located in Menakwisk in St. John, New Brunswick, which is situated on the traditional and unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik Maliseet people. Well, hey everyone, welcome to episode number 95 of the AdNonTech podcast. I think probably this episode will resonate for folks. It's on a pretty practical level, if I dare say. Not that our other episodes are not, but I think this is something where if you're an educator in any way, shape, or form, this topic will have some, you've been through this before in one way or the other, is what I'm trying to say. I am Matt Stranek. My voice is a little bit hoarse, but we're going to power through here. And I am joined by, as always, Dr. Doug Reed. Doug, how are you doing? And why don't you tell us about today's topic, bud?
Sure. Today's topic is going to be hiring in education and more about hiring practices and how people get hired and stuff. And I'm doing pretty well. For the first time in many, many years, I'm actually watching the Olympics.
Wow.
And I'm enjoying all the good news stories because, my goodness, I need more good news stories.
100%.
Yeah, it's one of the joys of having CBC Gem as literally the only streaming service that we're willing to pay for.
Fantastic.
All the Olympics are on, and it's all broken up really nicely. It's like, oh, do you want to watch mixed curling? Oh, do you want to watch snowboard big air? Do you want to watch? And they've got all the stuff, and you just go to the different streams. It's really nice. It's like what the BBC was doing in 2010 when I was over there watching the Olympics in 2010. They finally caught up, only 16 years later.
Outstanding. Any particular highlights thus far?
Yeah, the mixed curling is crazy. It's because most curling teams have 4 people and 2 people sweep, and that guides the direction and the distance the stone goes. And mixed curling is 2 people, a man and a woman. And basically when somebody throws the stone, they have to run to catch up with it, and then they sweep the stone themselves. It's
wow.
It is more energetic than I'm ever interested in being, but it's fascinating to watch. And they only throw 5 rocks in end instead of 8 rocks in end. It's just kind of neat how you can get excited for something that's so low risk. It's one of those. It's like the fantasy and sci-fi novels I've started to read that are like cozy. It's low stakes, low risk. It's just people doing stuff, whatever it happens to be. And the world's not coming to an end. I read one of these little books I read. It was all about, is the bookstore going to make it? That was, and then the other one was, is the coffee shop going to get started and be able to run? Like, that is literally, it's not invasions and worlds colliding and stuff. So to have the Olympics, it's like, I know I couldn't make any of the shots those curlers are making. I know watching the skiers, I can't do any of that. I'm still a firm believer. I don't know about you. I used to be a bit athletic. And I think that they should take a regular person to the Olympics and let them go first. Because then we could take a look and say, whoa, yeah, I'm sitting on my couch eating potato chips, right? It's like, I could do that. It's like, no, I couldn't. So it would just be just more of an homage to the people that have put the time and effort in to actually get good at these various events.
Outstanding, Doug. Well, yeah, well, that's really a positive, optimistic note to get started on here. And now, what's really the hiring motivation here? Because I know that this is actually a topic that you brought forward a few weeks ago, and then we did the last two episodes sort of after this set of notes had been prepared. Can you speak to perhaps what the motivation was and why we did a couple of episodes on other topics before circling back to this one?
The previous topics that we've covered in the last couple of weeks about AI slump and such, those for me were of a place of joy. They were happy that I could go in and bang away at some of the foolishness that's going on. With hiring and education, this didn't come out of a place of joy for a bunch of reasons. But the big one was my wife is on a committee at her work. And so they're trying to hire 3 people, I think. 2, at least 2, maybe 3. And she came home less than happy. And my wife doesn't rant. And she came in and she's like, could somebody just tell people to stop doing this in hiring practices? Just stop it. It's like when education students get told, oh, create a portfolio. Take the portfolio to the interview with you. And every hiring person is saying, don't do that. We're not looking. We don't have time. Right? You want to send it a couple of days before, great, but we're not looking at it while we're interviewing. That is not happening at all. But that is one of the constant things people in various education programs are telling the students. Oh, put the portfolio together. That'll show all your skills. And it's like, bug off. Nobody's looking. Why are you telling them this lie? Get in touch with your industry and find out the truth. So it was a point of frustration in my household. And it made me feel good because it's like, yeah, okay, I've been choked about that before, but not for years. And my wife came home and they're jumping through the hoops to get people hired and shortlisting and all the rest. And it was just her frustration gave me vindication for my feelings over the years. But it just wasn't happy feelings. So it wasn't from trying to get hired. It was from trying to do the hiring. Because I'm sure you and I could do a couple of episodes on the frustrations of trying to get hired and the BS that goes along with that. But so I'm trying to look
really shouting out Aaron here. Appreciate Aaron's presence behind the scenes as always. Your anecdote, your discussion there did put me in mind of when I graduated from the St. Thomas B.Ed program in the summer of 2008. And I was going around from small New Brunswick town to small New Brunswick town looking for one position as a teacher that might be available as an external hire. And I remember going to St. Stephen High School in St. Stephen, New Brunswick.
Yes.
And there were, for that one position, more than a dozen people sitting there waiting for their interview. And I had my portfolio with me, my binder that the instructors in the program had told me that I should put that together and bring it with me. And I brought it with me. And the interview was over in less than 15 minutes. And I was like, can I show you something from my portfolio? And they kind of sighed and they kind of went, okay. And I flipped it open and I kind of pointed to this one thing that I had done. And then I got out of there and I did not feel awesome about the whole thing. Point of fact, I went on to other things in terms of jobs, but I have a distinct recollection of that experience from almost 20 years ago. And boy, oh boy, you've really hit on something there, I think, with that framing of that, Doug. So I definitely appreciate that. I'll also just put it out in terms of my immediate context. For the past couple of months, I've been working for an after school program, and I've decided just over the weekend that I've better served in my overall career trajectory stepping away from that. And as much as it's been a really positive experience, this is one of the very few times, if ever, that I'll be stepping away from something without actually having a job waiting for me. It's something where I've got some personal circumstances where I'm going to be moving to another location, probably for some personal reasons, but it's something where even though it's been a very positive experience for what it is, I am in fact stepping away from it in order to pursue other non-job related activities. So the timing of this particular episode is coming right on basically the day before I'll be putting in 2-ish weeks of notice at this role that I've had since early December. So
Wow. Okay. That was interesting news. I didn't know that. Good on you.
well, it's things moving forward that we place all this value on our careers. And within this show, we necessarily talk about a lot of professional and academic and specifically work related content. And this is something where personal factors have overtaken, I guess you could say, the strictly career oriented aspect of it. So, in any case, that's my standpoint for this particular episode this evening. And now, Doug, we are back in the habit. I'll say back in the habit because a couple of the topics that we've looked at over the past few weeks have had more, I guess, contemporary references to start out with. But in this
Yes, very
case, with
fair.
this Alexander reference you have in this fine list, we are going back more than a century, Doug. So why don't you tell us about this first reference here?
Alexander, 1916, hiring and firing, the economic waste. It's economic waste and how to avoid it. And that's what I wanted to base this whole episode on is the waste, the economic waste. Because how often do people look at that? I had a cousin that was unemployed for quite a chunk of time, and his uncle, who is awesome, I love my uncle, he's like, how is this helping society to have this young man unemployed? And it's like, I don't think society cares. I don't think society's designed to care about that. That does not matter to society. So when you're asking that question, my uncle didn't really like the answer, but then we chatted about it and he got it. Because yeah, my cousin's awesome too. Love him to death. But it was just one of those things. It's what is the big picture here? And this Alexander article, when it focuses on economic waste, it gives me the focus I wanted. Because the quote is, unquestionably the skill, experience, and intelligence of a new employee have much bearing upon the amount of that needs to be expended for his training. And so to put that in simpler terms, if you hire somebody with the skills, you don't have to train them as much. It's cheaper. They can jump right in. They can get started right away. And in education, I've never had a soft landing in jobs, right? It's like, oh, yeah, semester starts September the 1st. And boom, you're running. And you're running till the end of June. Or you get hired a week early. You start August 23rd, and you have a whole week to figure out where the photocopier is and what your code is to log into the network or whatever it happens to be. And those administrivia type things, they take time. Now, on top of that, if you're hiring somebody fresh that has no experience and the skills haven't been developed yet, what are you doing? Like, you're asking for it. So what is your focus if that's happening? So even Alexander over 100 years ago was saying, this is an issue. because the other half of the article is how to avoid it. And it's basically, yeah, don't do that. Don't hire people that aren't ready for the job unless you are willing to put a lot of time and effort into skilling them up and getting them ready to do the job. And you know there's going to be a dip. You know there's a dip in quality right away. So that's where it's starting from. That's where it was. So I just liked it. I got to go back 100 years and see what was up.
Well, absolutely. And I definitely think that quote and your framing of it are quite timely. Certainly the phenomenon of showing up with very little prep time, or one role that I had sort of had this whole week of pretty intensive teaching and learning oriented Pro D at the front of it. And then you really didn't have more than just a few days to actually prepare for your teaching, prepare for your course prep. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, they could have just as easily turned this into some lunch and learns, or they could have just as easily put an online module in place somehow, or something like this, because for new instructors, the 3 or 4 day window, which was allocated for course prep, getting to know these courses for the first time, plus the administrivia, plus just the general getting used to your new community, your new home, your new everything. It's a pretty high cognitive and social demand. And so definitely, Doug, your remarks kind of put me in the memory of that past experience from not that long ago. And so, yeah, I just appreciate the opportunity to speak to that, pal.
Right on. Glad I could help, because I remember my first couple of years. The first week that we were hired was sit-in meetings, and all the old timers at the back not caring, because they know whatever initiative's coming, yeah, that'll be done by October. Nobody's going to follow up on that, so why kill yourself? And then they just kept saying, "Can I go work in my classroom? I got to get my classroom ready. I got to get my courses ready." That's more important than whatever you're talking at us about. And it was just one of those things. Maybe I wasn't in the best schools, but it is very true. And if we're trying to deal with like teacher burnout and trying to keep people in the profession, hey, here's one obvious thing that you can do. And that leads us to Cochrane Smith and Fries in 2001.
Awesome.
Their article is called Sticks, Stones, and Ideology, the Discourse of Reform in Teacher Education. And they had a big conversation about, we know what's going on. We know the struggles. They're well recorded everywhere. They're not new. But instead, what are we doing? And they just kind of made a point of saying, what are we doing? For example, I'm going to read this quote, and I'm going to ask if you think anything there is just rocket surgery. And oh my goodness, isn't that innovative? Right? A better solution to the teacher quality problem is to simplify the entry and hiring process. Get rid of most hoops and hurdles. Instead of requiring a long list of courses and degrees, test future teachers for their knowledge and skills. Allow principals to hire the teachers they need. Focus relentlessly on results, on whether students are learning. I don't know if there's anything common sense revolutionary in there. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I really like that last bit about focus on results and whether students are learning, because I do think that's something that can get lost in the administrative enterprise, the hoop jumping, which a lot of hiring committees tend to get mired up in. It seems that whoever is on the employee wanting employment, right, the would-be employee, is so concerned with representing themselves a certain way that part of the conversation doesn't really happen. And similarly, those who are on these committees are so intent on making sure that their I's are crossed and their T's are dotted, that they are fulfilling all of the mandated administrative elements themselves, that the actual aspect of student learning, which is why ostensibly these institutions exist in the first place, does tend to get put on the back burner. Whereas, as per this article, and I think, as you say, it's not rocket surgery, that ought to really probably be more front and center than what it has been, at least in my experience.
Oh, yeah. One of the teaching jobs I had, I was young and inexperienced, didn't know what I was doing. I was in the interview, and it was a distance interview. The interview was on the phone because they were not going to fly me across the country for the interview. I would have happily taken the flight, but that wasn't what they did. So I wasn't just prepared. I was like hyper prepared. I had all these essay dot points. I had all these questions that they were potentially going to ask. And then they asked a question and my eyes lit up. I was like, yeah, I got the answer for this. So I flipped my little notebook and I started. And they're like, okay, that's good for that question. Let's move on. And I was like, what? But I'm not done. Right? Like I have more. Like I thought I had blown the question, because I've been in interviews where I have blown the question. I 100% have been in those interviews. And they're like, and so they did that to me 2 or 3 times in the interview. And I'm like, oh man, I am bombing this. And I thought, well, maybe if I just ask why they're stopping me, that's at least information I can use in my next interview as I try to learn, because learning how to interview for a job, that's a skill that doesn't get taught. That does not get taught. So at one point after the 3rd time, I'm like, I'm not sure what's going on here. Right? Like I have more to answer for these questions. And the person doing the interview, the person leading the interview, because there was about 4 or 5 of them on the call, said, we're giving you scores based on all of your answers, and you've maxed out the possible points you can get on these questions. I'm like, oh, I thought I was bombing them. And they're like, no, you're doing great. Just keep going. You're in the right direction. Keep going. And I had automatically taken it to be, oh no, I'm screwed. And it was no. It's however their grid system was. Apparently they had some kind of wacky table that they would have to calculate these scores and do all this stuff. And it's like, you tell me that's not a hoop and a hurdle, right? Like let's tie the hiring team's hands to say, yeah, let's jump through these hoops and make them do this paperwork when they know who they want after the interview. But so it was just weird. And again, not knowing how to be interviewed was tough and scary for me, especially then.
Definitely.
So I want to jump to the next one then, 2006, Darling Hammond.
Awesome.
Constructing 21st Century Teacher Education. And the quote from this one is, whereas some states do not allow districts to hire unqualified teachers, others routinely allow the hiring of candidates who have not met their standards, even when qualified teachers are available. And I've seen situations like that, like in northern BC, of all places. There wasn't enough qualified teachers. So it was like, do you have any degree? If you have any degree, the principal will be your supervisor and you can come take care of these 30 students. And the principal will make sure you're doing an okay job, even though you don't have a teacher's license. And then there was qualified teachers that didn't get hired. And I never taught there. I only had some experience. I haven't just been a teacher. I've also been a consultant and I've worked with school districts and stuff. So it was, what is going on? So we've lost track of what we're actually measuring. In 1916, it's all about what's important. Like when it comes to the waste, the economic waste. In 2001, it's all about the results our students learning. And then 2006, they're putting a spotlight on the fact that we got teachers, but we're not hiring them. So the question is, why? Why are we not hiring them? Is it a union busting thing? Is it they're way cheaper to hire my friend's wife or my friend's husband or my cousin or my nephew? I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, because this drives me a little bonkers.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, Doug. Well, you were speaking, it did put me in mind of a situation here in New Brunswick, where back in the summer, late summer, when I determined I was coming back to New Brunswick and I was going to be spending time here and getting reestablished and whatnot, I heard from quite a number of people on Facebook, my social media, elsewhere, that there's such a huge demand for teachers in New Brunswick. Huge demand. That substitute teachers were being hired with local permits, just in the situation that you've described, where people who didn't have teaching degrees are being hired for roles. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll look into this myself, because it seems easy enough to step into it. But then when I signed up for the portal and started uploading my documentation, and even though I've got this is my 20-year, teacher anniversary year, as it were, educator anniversary year, one of the requirements for any kind of regular teacher was that out of 3 professional references, 2 of them had to have been past direct supervisors. And that was something where I am not in touch with any past direct supervisors. Some of them have moved on since I've been in those institutions. Some of them really wouldn't probably have much to say for me, but that doesn't change the fact that I have, for instance, 5 or 6 really outstanding people who are still active in their fields in various ways, people who have had multi-million-dollar grants in some cases for research programs in higher education and the like, people who would be able to speak fairly of my capability as a frontline educational services provider. But this requirement where 3 professional references, 2 must have been direct supervisory, that suggests to me that what they're looking for are people who can follow directions first and foremost rigidly. And I think perhaps a lot of folks are being not excluded, but they're not opening up their hiring pool as widely as they potentially could. And maybe that's just me sort of shouting sour grapes or give me a job, you group of unionized folks, or whatever the case may be. I think it's not completely misguided, my thinking here, my concern here. But yeah, what you've described, Doug, has just put me in mind of that particular scenario. And so in my case, I'm sort of working on ways to potentially get supervisory references, for instance, from a volunteer sector or from other kinds of work that are not directly associated with a K-12 teaching role, but in terms of what is out there in a job market, assets that are being utilized and activated versus those that are not. Yeah, that's really just something that has sprung to mind pretty strongly with this particular quote here, Doug. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to that.
No worries. I have another similar example where I applied for a job and they're like, we need 3 written references. Like, not here's the phone number or the email. It's they need to write you a letter. And so I contacted them and said, so after the interview, you want these letters? And they're like, nope, you're not even getting shortlisted without these letters being submitted.
Yes.
And the letters have to come straight to us. It's like, then how do I know that you've got them? Right? Because literally they didn't even want an email. They wanted something printed, put in an envelope, and mailed through Canada Post. And then they also wanted this one place. These guys were nuts. I think they were doing it on purpose. They had somebody they wanted to hire. You needed to have your signature on your application. And it's like, but I type it, right? So I type my name. Nope, that's not a signature. That doesn't count. And I got excluded from a job. They didn't even look at my application because I didn't have my signature on it. And then I contacted them and said, what's going on? Like, this is crazy. Like, I meet all the requirements. And I had an insider at that institution on the committee. And the insider's like, this person's at the top of the list. And they're like, nope, didn't sign it. Too bad, they're out. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. And then apparently I was expected to print it out and then sign it and then scan it and then ship it to them. That was a hoop that they wanted. And honestly, they just didn't want me or anybody that fit my demographic. That's what I got from my insider. My insider was like, yeah, you never stood a chance, even though you were by far the best choice.
The preferred internal candidate is a factor.
Oh,
it's been very, very much of the time. Very much of the time. Absolutely.
That's it. And it's so rare that I'm the internal favored candidate. So going from there, I have a 2019 article from Tallman and Calhoun, Pedagogical Approach to Developing the Hiring Practices of Higher Ed Administrators. And so this is just pre-COVID, so 6-7 years ago now. And they talk about most student affairs professionals will serve in a managerial and or supervisory role at some point in their careers, which makes sense, right? Like, I get it. Yeah, that's true. Yet we found only 11% of higher education graduate preparation programs have required coursework in this competency area. So 11% of the programs are actually training them to do that. And otherwise, which is why we did an episode 3 years ago about educational leadership, what an oxymoron. Right? I'm not trying to go back to grind that old hatchet, but it's we're not training them. People are not being trained how to do this stuff. So some are naturally good, and so they skate by, and some are bad, and it's like, oh, well, okay, yeah, we know they struggle with that, but it's like, where's the professional development to train them? Or better, how did they get hired if they didn't know how to do it? Right? Like, what are we looking at here? What's going on? Is this another internal hire? And it's like, yeah, too bad. We know it's going to be painful for the next 15 years as they were in that role, but oh well, they were nice. They went to my kid's christening, or they brought me a bottle of wine the last time we had a social outing or something. So we're not even training them. They're not getting trained. And I don't know if you have any, have you ever been in a leadership role where you've had people underneath you?
Actually, it was a position of internal leadership, I suppose. My first position, I guess my second position as a teacher at the College of North Atlantic, Qatar, communications instructor. And for 2 pretty awesome years, I had the privilege of being the lead instructor among the communications instructor cohort. And so it wasn't like it was a secondment. I mean, it was like half of a administrative release, half teaching, but it was something where your role did have a curricular responsibility. It did have professional development responsibility. There were, at that time, 25 plus others within the department. And for me, relatively early in my career, it was a real gust of wind. It felt really kind of cool to be in that situation, in that role. It wasn't like department chair, it wasn't dean, it wasn't associate dean, it wasn't anything like that, but still, it had a level of leadership and responsibility for certain aspects of the running of the department. And people would come into my office and have an issue and wanted to get my perspective on it. And I was able to, I feel like, make a pretty okay contribution to it. And now, of course, we're getting on 20 years ago since that happened, 17, 18 years ago anyway. And there really haven't been any opportunities since then. And in fact, I could say that I haven't always been the best, shall we say, at ingratiating myself with the leadership element within some of the roles that I've had since then. But in terms of the quote, in terms of what's being spoken to here, the lack of training in managerial or supervisory roles, I do think that that is somewhat to do with educational teacher training programs or what have you. They're really trying to get frontline workers because there's, as we know, high levels of attrition, high levels of burnout, people leaving within the first 5 years of being in these kinds of roles. So having a constant influx of people to fill these positions that are rapidly being vacated, it's almost like a Band-Aid approach in terms of the hiring. It's sort of a case where you're getting people to come in and it's like a tourniquet. It's like you're putting on a temporary measure to get these folks in, and then hopefully it'll stabilize long enough for the proper system-wide or institution-wide body to catch up, right? To get the support that it needs, and thereby having the training for those frontline roles being suited strictly to fill in those roles and without really any long-term future forward kind of curricula associated with it. But that's just my takeaway from it at the moment, Doug.
Yeah, I've been in a few leadership roles, and I know exactly how much professional development help I got. Zero. It was figure it out. And I'm like, my PhD was about research. And yeah, there was some education and there was some computing and there was some like data analysis and there was or data analytics and curriculum and like all that stuff is there. None of it was here's how to do the bureaucrat jump through the hoop paperwork stuff. I found out 2 years into a job that I was the person in charge of ergonomics for my department. Oh. Nobody told me. It wasn't anywhere. Like it was never written down. And somebody came to me choked. My seat's no good. I need a new chair. I'm like, okay. Right? I've known the person for a couple of years. They're a good person and they're just unhinged. And I'm like, okay. Well, what are you going to do about it? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And it's like, the union said you're the person. And I'm like, this is news to me. I'll happily look into it. I have no clue what you're talking about. And it turned out that the people above me took that money and played games with it. And the people in the union were told by the union reps that the money was there and allocated because the people above me promised that it was. And the way those games and stories, and I was middle management. I was stuck in the middle, getting squeezed on both sides. But I had zero. Like my training was basically I used to be the captain of various sports teams. People would come to me in when stuff happened, and I would help them figure things out. I ran a university residence when I was an undergrad. Like I was a residence coordinator or Don or Dean or whatever they called it, because the name changed while I was in there. Again, zero training. There was some meetings on, you got to fill this form out at this time and you got to fill that form out at that time, but nothing else. It's like just the utter lack of how to teach people how to be leaders. Because if people don't know how to be leaders, how the heck can they put a process in place to do the hiring correctly? Like, how does that happen? And then what are we doing? And it comes back to the Darling Hammond article about, oh yeah, we're hiring whoever. It's like, okay, you've got a heartbeat, you're in. It's like, what? How is that a thing? It's like, oh no, this one has kids, so she's dealt with little kids before, so she'll be fine. And it's like, no, that's not what pedagogy is. Having your own kids is very different than teaching a class of 30 students a particular curriculum. But yeah, so I just wanted to come back to the fact that we know that basically 90% of programs are not teaching their graduates how to be leaders. Right? It's really obvious. And we're only talking about the hiring. Look at the other stuff. Look at all the other stuff that leaders are supposed to be doing. And then you wonder why there's all these social media posts with, here's how you know when you've burned out a good one. Right? This is, oh, you lost all your high achievers. Yeah. If all your high achievers quit, that's not them. That's you. That sort of thing. And but we haven't put any of these people in an opportunity to succeed. The situation, they did not get the help they needed. They did not get the support they needed. And just coming back to the foolish teaching portfolio thing, right? That was a trend in the mid 90s. So 30 years ago, that was a trend because I remember it. And that is still being sold to students as, oh, you got to do this, you got to do this, because the people telling them don't know. And why would they know? Right? Most of those profs haven't been in a classroom, in a K-12 classroom in forever. And the ones that have, my PhD taught me how to do research and how to publish. It didn't teach me how to do the rest of this stuff. So
I would say there's a serious disconnect between what's being taught and what students leaving these programs can expect on their way into being paid professionals.
Yeah. And then you take a look at what's the number? 90% of people in education leave the field within 5 years. So we're messing over a whole lot of people. And it all starts with the lack of leadership and not hiring the right people and not supporting them. I think that is such a
supporting them. That's a huge part of it, Doug. Absolutely.
You could take people that's like, ooh, you're not my first choice, but maybe I can get you to where you need to be. But that it's back to that open mindset, closed mindset. If people have an open mindset and they're empathetic and they care, we can get you there. But if you already know everything, forget it. if you're just a closed mindset and you're already the expert on all things in the world, I'm never hiring you. But some of them come across really well in interview panels. Some of them really interview well because they have confidence.
Sometimes misplaced sense of knowledge or self-confidence can tick a lot of the boxes, right? The personal characteristics and qualities which may be measured within a rubric or a marking scheme or whatever that's associated with a hiring process.
Yeah. And I've been that person in interviews where I'm on the panel and I'm writing. So now when I get interviewed, if people aren't writing, it's like, okay, what have I done wrong? Because they should be writing this down because I know they have some wacky formula or equation that they got to squeeze all these things into. So if they're not writing it down, it's like, okay, if they already decided I'm not the guy, I've had that happen twice. I've been in 2 different interviews at 2 different institutions, both in Edmonton, where partway through the interview, one of the panel just turned around, just spun the seat around, started looking out the window. And the second time it happened, I'm like, hey, are you okay? Like, I'm committing my time to do this. What's going on? Right? Why are you looking out the window? Are you feeling all right? Like, do you have a migraine or do you need to? It's like, no. I've already made my decision. So, yeah, there's so that exists too. But anyway, I want to get to my 5th article here. The HORA 2020, hiring as cultural gatekeeping, because they talk about the fact that employers regularly hire for cultural fit, and not just on the basis of educational credentials and technical expertise, and that has important implications for higher ed professionals. And that, I really struggle with that, but because I've been on the other side of it. I've been trying to get in. I've had people that I know on the committee, and they're like, yeah, you have 5 times the publications of everybody else. You have twice as much teaching as everybody else. Your references are amazing. They were never going to hire you, and here's why. You would challenge the culture. Just by being in the room, you challenge the culture. When I was at NAIT, they made me become a master instructor. They made me take their teaching program, and that did not go well because I was fresh. I had a PhD for about 3 years, right? I had been a tenured professor, and I had to come back. I had to give that up. But anyway, so it got to the point the other people in the room, the other students in the room were like, they would ask a question, like the person at the front would say something. They would turn to me and say, is that true? And I'm like, no, they're making that up. This is a hoop to jump through. Just jump through it. And then the person at the front of the room is like, well, I disagree. You and I need to talk. It's like, we can talk right now. Let's go in the hall. It's like, let's not. Let's do it right here. Let's do it right in front of everybody. And I'm going to take my PhD that I busted my ass to get. And let's talk about do you have a master's? Oh, you do, and it's in business. And you're going to tell me education stuff? Let's go. Let's have at it. Right. So they didn't just hire one of me. They had a whole team. They had about 7. And other people that had survived at NAIT for a long time would come in and say, there's no other room at NAIT like this. Right? You guys do not fit the culture here. So we didn't fit. We were an experiment. We did great work. The students loved us. The instructional staff loved us, but we didn't fit the culture. So boom, one day they just called everybody into the room and slid papers across the desk to say, you're gone. We're closing the department. Wow. I was on vacation. I didn't even know. So I got to work there for an extra 3 days because I didn't come. They didn't fire me until I came back from, but it wasn't even fired. It was, yeah, we're closing this whole department. Right? They got rid of 56 people in one day. Just there you go. Too bad. Or maybe not one day, whatever, 3 days. But it was just, we didn't fit the culture. And the most important thing was cultural fit. So it just.
Well, Doug, first of all, I have to say, I'm sorry you went through that.
Yeah,
I mean, things happen that need to happen in the longer scheme of life. I do tend to believe, but still, it sounds like that was a poorly conceived experiment that you, as an entry-level employee at that institution, had to suffer through things that were outside of your control, and had more thought been placed into the positions and the kinds of people that were actually being sought and the skill sets that were actually being sought. It seems to me that you could have continued there and made continued excellent contributions, or they could have saved everybody the effort and hired people who were more explicitly aligned with the cultural norms of the institution in question.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know how that whole department got created, but it's one of those things. Like at the BMI, we all had to do the practice teaching. There's little 15-minute create a lesson plan, and they'll mark it and they'll evaluate how you do that fun foolishness. And the lady that evaluated me was a nurse who's like, "Oh no, but I'm a nurse educator." And I was like, "Okay." And then she put her little chart out and said, "I didn't see you make the transition from this part of your lesson to that part of your lesson." And I'm like, "Okay." She goes, "So I can't give you any points for that." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" So she goes, "I'm going to give you a 3 out of 5 because that's just a pass and I need you to sign it." And it's like, I'm not signing that. You don't have the skill to evaluate me. I moved through all the steps. Everybody saw me move through all the steps. All my students, which are the other educators, saw me. They all commented on how well I did. And you're telling me because you didn't see it, it doesn't count? I'm not signing it. And I was like, "Look, I'm doing my best not to get up your nose." Right? But it's like, if you make me sign this, I'm just going to go straight to my union. And then we're going to have a fight. Or I said, if you try to force the issue again, every time you say anything in the class for the next week, I'm going to call you on it every single time because you're wrong every single time. So do you want to fight with me every moment of the next week? Because that's what's coming. Or sign the thing and say I passed, right? I don't even want to look at it. I don't even want a copy of it. Just say I passed so I could jump through the hoop. She's like, "Oh, I don't know if I can do that." I said, you have all the power. You can do whatever you want.
You have all the power.
Yeah,
well, kudos to you for sticking to your guns, Doug. I wouldn't have hoped or expected otherwise, but that is a very vivid, tacit example of sticking to your guns, if I can say that, pal.
Yeah. And less than a year later, they closed the whole department. So I don't know if that was part of it or not. I know that when I worked with the deans, I was the person that liaised with the deans on all the curriculum development, and they were like, "Oh my goodness, can you come to all our meetings? You just make everything so easy." And it's like, "Yeah, no problem." I certainly can. Right? Here's the info. Here's the facts. Here's where we're moving forward. What feedback do you have, or where do you want to stay ahead? We'll do that. And that was it. My meetings took less than 8 minutes. And they're used to like hour and a half of slogging through, getting nothing done. And I was just, "Okay, let's make this happen. I don't like meetings. Let's do this." And they were so refreshed, like they had a time to actually chat. And they laughed. They sat in the meeting and they told a couple of jokes. It's like, "We've never done this. This is not the culture here." I was like, "Oh, okay, well." And it just
way more pleasurable, way more human, if you will.
Yeah. And it's like, so why does the culture have to be miserable? Just because you inherited it? You stepped into a culture that wasn't really nice? Why can't we make a change to make it better for people? But anyway,
I could not think of a better way to go out in terms of these references, Doug. That's really heartfelt, and that's really vividly representative of your lived experience. And I certainly have to think that anybody listening to the audio or checking out this video will see something or hear something there that resonates from within their own experience, or that they may apply in their own setting or context, pal. So thanks a lot for that, Doug.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Glad to share. So I have a couple of pieces of digital clutter that I've shared.
You do.
Is there anything in there that struck your fancy?
Or well, as ever, folks, I definitely recommend both within the video. You can check some of these out as we're speaking to them, but then all of them, of course, are up on the website for the podcast. I have to say, Doug, out of all of them this go round, I really appreciate Maslow's hierarchy of needs applied to employee engagement.
Yeah.
And I just like the paradigm of Maslow generally. It's always struck me as something that they kind of wedge into a B.Ed program of study, and that it still seems to prove its value through various contexts and settings that I've run into it ever since. So the bottom of the pyramid, survival, then with security, and then with belonging, sort of in the middle there, and then with importance, and then with self-actualization at the very top of the pyramid, and some very cool indicators which tie that, in this case, to employees being engaged. And I have had experiences where you could almost do an inverted pyramid, where you could turn that upside down, where you're really idealistic starting out, and then by the end of it, you're just trying to shuffle through day to day without getting too much dirt on you, or without getting noticed the wrong way. But yeah, that's really something that, folks, if you're looking at the Camtasia recording, I recommend zooming in on it a little bit and thinking about how that might apply to your own context. Anything you wanted to speak to on that one, Doug, before you shift out to one that you were thinking of here?
My favorite bit of this one was on the far right-hand side with motivators and demotivators.
Yes.
And that was something I haven't seen in a lot of Maslow diagrams before. And I was like, yeah, that fits, right? When people are in survival mode, or they're just there for security, that's a demotivator, right? You are not getting their best work, right? Guaranteed. Things could be better. So I just love the motivator demotivator component of that.
Yes, totally.
For me, the one thing I really liked is I found I don't know where I found it. Maybe it was Instagram. It's just because you have a PhD does not mean you can teach. It means you can research. Please know the difference. And it's like, yeah,
100%.
It's so true. Right? I did not learn how to teach doing my PhD. I stepped into it already knowing that stuff. So that's what I've got with those. And yeah, some of the other ones I've been around for years and years and years, right? Like the Scott Adams one, because he just passed away recently. So I thought I'd put that in there when it comes to culture. And I have three last things. The word, question, and the phrases of the podcast. Word of the podcast is hiring, because this was all about hiring process and who's hiring and how are they being hired and all that stuff. Question of the podcast is, how does the hiring practices in education shape students' education? If you're hiring certain people, that is definitely going to impact how the students end up learning and what they end up doing and how they do at the start of their careers. That is absolutely going to happen. So it's, what are we doing? Hiring is such a key component in post-secondary, especially with where are we headed? And it tells what our values are. And unfortunately, I keep telling everybody what my values are. I want the students to have the best lives possible. That's mine. So that turns into, if we help the instructional staff and they're as good as they can be, that will help the students be the best they can be. So it's just one of those things that roll around. But if anybody has any comments on that, love to have that conversation. Awesome. And phrases of the podcast, when it comes to hiring or how people get hired, it's concerned with representing themselves a certain way. And that's what happens, right? When you meet somebody, people are representing themselves a certain way. And some people are really good at selling that, and some people aren't.
True.
It's just life. And unfortunately for me, I have strong pattern recognition skills. So I've been in groups where somebody new comes in. It's like, oh, here's so-and-so. They're so nice. They're this, to that. And it's like, ooh, no. I'm going to stand back until they prove they're not the way my nervous system just made me react. And unfortunately, I have never been wrong. Other people is like, geez, you're awfully tough on that person. It's like, yeah, come talk to me in 2 weeks or come talk to me in a month. And they're like, oh, okay, we see it now. How did you know that? It's like, how did you not? Anyway, yeah, that's my own thing. And the other phrase of the podcast is, you have all the power. And that's what hiring is all about. And those are some of the hoops and some of the hurdles that are set up. So that's basically what I wanted to cover. Just how are we doing it, and look at the impact it has.
Well, a pleasure as always, Doug. I certainly appreciate this opportunity to chat with you on this significant topic. And I have to think that, at least in higher education and whatnot, this is actually right around the time that committees are being struck to hire for positions that will be filled for the September semester for the upcoming academic year. They tend to do things a few months out. People don't like to work over the summer if they don't have to. So these kinds of conversations and interactions and administrative processes are likely well underway in higher education and K-12 even going forward right now. It's getting close to the hiring season, I have to think. So I think hopefully this has been helpful for anybody who's checking it out, anybody who has any comments, concerns, questions, or thoughts. Do feel free to reach out to us through the website or in other ways. But otherwise, I don't have anything else. Doug, do you?
No, other than I hope everybody has a wonderful time, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.